Chapter 1 Class Awakening. All of you, this is your last awakening ceremony. If you still fail to awaken, prepare to live the rest of your life as an ordinary human and attend a normal university. You can also try to improve your cultivation in these last few months to increase your chances of entering an academy. The teacher's voice echoed across the room as several students stood before him, listening attentively, their expressions a mix of anxiety and hope. Among these students was Michael. Michael was not from this world. He had arrived in this body just 3 weeks ago, a body that coincidentally shared his name. Unlike his original world, in this one, everyone between the ages of 16 and 18 had a chance to awaken a class. More than 200 years ago, the apocalypse descended upon this world, bringing spatial rifts that spawned countless monsters and unleashed chaos. Fortunately, following the apocalypse, the world became digitized for a select few who would later be known as Awakeners. Thanks to these Awakeners, whose classes granted them incredible powers, the apocalypse ended after decades, and humanity finally reclaimed their land. When peace returned, as expected, Awakeners became figures of importance, and it became a dream for young people aged 16 to 18 to become one. However, becoming an Awakener was a privilege granted to only a few, and for this group of 18-year-old students, this was their last chance. Michael was nervous too. Though he had only been in this world for 3 weeks, he understood the significance of this ceremony. While it wasn't as though all hope would be lost if he failed to awaken, it was undeniable that no path held more promise than becoming an Awakener. Under the nervous gaze of nearly 100 students below the podium, the teacher picked up a file from the table in front of him and began to call out names. Lillian Stone. Why yes, sir. The first student called was a young woman. Upon hearing her name, she immediately walked toward the podium, but perhaps due to her nervousness, she stumbled and fell. However, no one laughed or made fun of her. On any other occasion, they might have, but today, they weren't sure they would perform any better than the student who had fallen. The teacher, seemingly accustomed to such mishaps, waited patiently for her to get back on her feet and approach him. When she finally reached him, he wasted no time and gestured toward the transparent orb on the table. This is your 3rd time here, so you know what to do. Just place your hand on the awakening orb. If there's a reaction, it means you've successfully awakened. If there isn't, the teacher left his sentence unfinished, but it made the hearts of the students on the podium sink. Michael felt it too, though he handled it better than the others. Thanks to his mental age and the challenges he'd faced before he died from cancer in his previous life, he could keep his composure. Michael's eyes were drawn to the awakening orb on the table between the teacher and the female student. From what they had been taught in school, every Awakener, aside from gaining a class that granted them supernatural powers, also had the ability to connect their consciousness to another world, a world filled with treasures, and could quickly enhance their prowess. It was said that this world really resembled a game, though, in many ways, it was not. The awakening orb itself originated from that mysterious world. Just as the teacher had said, the girl didn't require any assistance. With a familiarity that made the corner of Michael's eyes twitch slightly, she placed both hands on the awakening orb and waited. A few seconds passed, and just as the teacher was preparing to dismiss the disappointed girl, who looked like she might burst into tears at any moment, a white light suddenly shone from the orb. Following that, a manifestation, in the form of twin swords, appeared on her back before disappearing. Lillian Stone has successfully awakened a class, martial artist. The teacher announced, his voice filled with surprise, and his previously expressionless face showing clear astonishment. For this group of 18-year-olds, he hadn't expected any of them to awaken. But to think that the very first student called up would do so filled him with considerable surprise. It was well known that the best age to awaken a class was 16, as that was when the chances were highest. The older one got, the less likely awakening became. When the students heard the teacher's announcement, the previously quiet hall erupted with noise. Wow, Lillian actually awakened. First come, first served. Damn, tisk, to think the 4th to the last dumbest person in all of Class 3 would awaken. You do know that awakening successfully doesn't necessarily have anything to do with intelligence, right? Shut up. Of course, I know. Can't I just be bitter for a minute? What happened to my freedom to be negative? Like his fellow classmates, Michael was pleasantly surprised that the first student to step onto the podium had awakened. It was common knowledge that their group had almost no hope of awakening, so seeing someone succeed lifted everyone's spirits and filled them with a renewed sense of hope. However, that newly lit hope was quickly shattered. Me Akeem, awakening failed. Bruce Lean, awakening failed. Then the fourth, the fifth, all the way up to the 48th. Every student who stepped up to the podium failed to awaken, except for the first female student. The entire hall felt as silent as a graveyard, save for the quiet sobs of those who had failed their awakening. Chapter 2 Cultivation. Michael tried his best to ignore the cries of his fellow classmates around him. Failing to awaken in this world was not like failing a college exam on Earth. In the latter case, you could keep trying, and many alternatives weren't considered worse than attending college. But here, failing to awaken had no equivalent alternative. It was like a poor man, burdened with the responsibility of caring for his two chronically ill parents while also supporting a younger sibling through school, betting on 3 different games with a chance to win $1 million each, and losing everything. In such a situation, breaking down and crying wouldn't be unusual. The scene around Michael now was eerily similar. Most of the students at Woodstone Public School No. 3 came from families living near or below the poverty line. For them, successfully awakening was like having $100 million land in their lap. But for these sobbing students, that distant hope of drastically changing their lives had slipped through their fingers 3 times in a row. It was no wonder that some of them broke down in tears immediately. Michael tried not to let the dark atmosphere surrounding him affect his mindset and attempted to stay positive. His situation wasn't any better than those around him, if not worse. In this world, the original owner of this body was an orphan living with his aunt, a widow with a child of her own to care for. Together, the family of 3 barely survived on the limited funds his aunt managed to earn. For Michael, successfully awakening was the fastest way to change his family's fate, but his chance of awakening was less than 1%. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of bitterness. Though he was grateful for the chance to live again, especially in a healthy body, it would be painful to live a life of mediocrity. Yet, there was nothing he could do about his slim chance of awakening. All he could do was hope for the best. Michael continued to watch as more students stepped up to the podium, only to fail in their attempts to awaken. There were only a total of 86 students in the hall, so Michael's turn was approaching quickly. Since the teacher hadn't assigned a queue and called names at random, Michael could only wait for his turn. Just when the teacher in charge of the awakenings thought that this batch of students would only produce 1 awakener, the awakening orb in front of him suddenly emitted light. The cause of the reaction was a male student standing before him. Just like the female student who had first awakened, a manifestation appeared, standard for new awakeners. The male student's body glowed red, and a staff made of fire appeared in his hands before promptly disappearing. Brian Lian has successfully awakened a class, Fire Mage. The teacher announced. As with the first awakening, an uproar erupted in the hall, but this time it was even more intense. Damn, Brian actually awakened. The heavens really aren't fair. I know, right? He's already one of the few students who managed to ignite their life seeds before the college exams, something rare even in big cities, and now he's lucky enough to awaken too. That's not all. His night breathing technique happens to align with the fire attribute, and now that he's awakened as a fire mage, the two will complement each other perfectly. FCK. Like his classmates, Michael also had an impression of Brian. At Woodstone Public High School No. 3, Brian Lian was one of the few outstanding students who could hold his own against those from private schools with better resources, despite his humble background. His reputation extended beyond the school. He was even somewhat known throughout Woodstone City. This fame wasn't because of his academic achievements but rather due to his exceptional talent in cultivation. The awakening orb wasn't the only piece of technology that awakeners had brought back from the mysterious realm known as the Land of Origins. They introduced other technologies that significantly boosted the real world's advancement. The Land of Origins wasn't exclusive to humans, many other civilizations of various races existed there. In fact, humans here could be considered newcomers to that world. These civilizations had already used the Land of Origins to significantly advance their own societies. Using their methods, awakeners managed to bring something back to this world: cultivation. Cultivation offered a method for ordinary people to gain supernatural powers, although they couldn't progress as quickly as awakeners, be as powerful as them, or enter the Land of Origins. Brian practiced the breathing technique of the night cultivation system and had considerable talent in cultivation, so even if he failed to awaken, he still had a bright future. Just as awakeners were respected and needed in this world, cultivators were too. One was just way too at the top to be compared to anything, but the need of the two were equal. Well, according to what has been told to Michael, the world changed when the apocalypse descended. It was no longer just a planet but a realm. Planet Aurora became the Aurora realm. Some of the cracks that brought monsters into the world remained, with new ones occasionally appearing. Some were filled with monsters, while others served as passages to other realms. Awakeners were few in number, so cultivators were needed to handle these realms. Awakeners advanced society, while cultivators kept it safe. This was something that had been taught to Michael and other children from a young age. Becoming an awakener was more desirable, though. Cultivating required resources, and they weren't cheap, with costs only increasing as one progressed. This alone had already cut off more than half of the population's ability to walk on this path. Generally, only the talented or the wealthy had a significant chance of achieving great success in cultivation. The teacher, who hadn't even smiled much when Lillian Stone awakened, now had a wide grin as he addressed Brian. "Come stand here and wait," he said, pointing to the spot beside him where Lillian Stone also stood. He was thrilled that a genius from the school had just become even more exceptional, a super genius. After settling that, the teacher continued with the awakening ceremony, but he was met with disappointment as no other student managed to awaken, not even those with talent in cultivation. This wasn't unexpected. Just because a student had talent in cultivation didn't mean they would awaken a class, especially not at the age of 18. However, the teacher remained quite pleased, as the school now had 2 more awakeners to its name. The awakening ceremony continued, and soon it was time for the 80th student to step up to the podium, Michael. Michael Norman. Yes, sir. Hearing his name called, Michael nervously made his way up to the podium. Since the previous owner of this body didn't have much presence at school, he didn't have anyone cheering for him. Soon, Michael reached the podium, and under the teacher's guidance, he placed his hands, now unknowingly sweating, on the awakening orb, filled with anticipation. Chapter 3 Successful Awakening. Seconds ticked by, and Michael could almost hear his own heartbeat pounding in his chest. Each student was allocated 30 seconds with the awakening orb. Any more time was pointless, as it had been proven over the years. 10 seconds passed. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. 25 seconds. Just as the teacher prepared to dismiss Michael, whose heart had already sunk into bitterness, the awakening orb under Michael's hand suddenly emitted a bright light. Instantly, Michael felt a warm sensation coursing through his body. His mind seemed to clear, and a surge of strength flowed through him. The manifestation that accompanied every new awakener soon appeared. A black, gloomy energy swirled around Michael, coating his body, while a dark staff briefly materialized in his hand before everything vanished. Michael was momentarily stunned by the sudden turn of events, but the voice of the equally surprised teacher brought him back to reality. Michael Norman has successfully awakened a class, Necromancer. The teacher announced. Another one, Necromancer, huh? That sounds powerful and maybe a little bit evil. Be more confident in your speech, brother. It's evil as fuck. Yeah, but as long as I can awaken a class, I wouldn't even mind if it involved selling my body. Just say you're horny, bro. As before, an uproar erupted in the hall, but it was more subdued than the previous 2 times. It couldn't be helped. Unlike the excitement over Lillian Stone's unexpected awakening or the amazement at Brian Leon's transformation into a super genius, Michael didn't have much of a presence in the school. But that wasn't the case anymore. Also, only a few of his classmates from Class 3, Section N8, were in the hall, and he recognized even fewer of them. He didn't personally know any of them. Good, 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 the teacher in charge of the ceremony said, repeating the word 3 times in delight. It wasn't that he knew Michael personally, but rather because a ceremony he had expected to yield no awakeners had surprisingly produced 3. If none had awakened, he wouldn't have been surprised. Such outcomes were common. Come stand beside me and wait, the teacher gestured for Michael to join the other 2 awakeners. Yes, teacher, Michael nodded, still in a daze, and compiled. Seeing a new comrade, Lillian and Brian both gave him a nod of acknowledgement, which Michael returned. In truth, Michael's attention was no longer fully on his surroundings. He could catch bits of what his classmates whispered about him, but he was too preoccupied to care. His attention was on what had just appeared before his eyes. A blue, transparent panel floated in front of Michael. Michael's mind wasn't focused on the details displayed on the panel. It was only now that he fully grasped what had just happened. He had awakened. He had really awakened. A surge of happiness rushed through him, and his tense shoulders finally relaxed. While this was only the beginning, the most important thing was that he had awakened. No matter what came next, his future now held new possibilities. Michael let out a deep sigh of relief and turned his attention back to the rest of the awakening ceremony. Only 6 students remained, and in about 4 minutes, the ceremony would conclude. Each student would soon return home, left to ponder their future based on the outcome of their awakening. Now that he no longer felt nervous, Michael's mind was free to think of other things. The most important realization was that he had awakened a class, the necromancer class. In truth, Michael knew little about awakeners and their classes beyond what he had learned in school and from hearsay. What he did know was that classes were generally categorized into 3 types: combat, support, and lifestyle. His necromancer class seemed like a mix of both combat and support, but Michael wasn't entirely sure. Aside from the knight and mage classes that were so influential in this world, he knew little about other classes. The school only taught general knowledge about awakeners, without going into much depth. Perhaps the higher-ups felt that students who were unlikely to awaken didn't need to know more and could better use their time studying or cultivating. It's also said that if one cultivated before awakening and had talent in it, they could activate a secondary class, so cultivation was seen as a good thing overall. Michael wasn't sure if limited information was unique to Woodstone Public High School No. 3, but he did know one thing for certain: there was no discrimination between classes. There was no such thing as an overly weak class, as all classes theoretically had no limits. Power depended on the awakeners themselves. According to the teachers, this even applied to lifestyle classes like tailors. Michael wasn't sure how true this was, but he figured he'd find out soon enough. After all, he was now an awakener, someone who should be valued by the government. Just as Michael sorted out his thoughts and was about to check the panel that had appeared in his mind earlier, the voice of the teacher in charge of the awakening ceremony caught his attention. Okay, that's it for today. For those of you who failed to awaken, remember that failing to become an awakener doesn't mean your futures are bleak. During the early days of the apocalypse, at least half of our ancestors who played a crucial role in our survival and advancement were ordinary people. So what if you didn't awaken? The sad students below the podium heard this, and a wave of motivation surged through them. Even Michael couldn't help but be impressed by the teacher's words. However, he knew that once they left the hall, the harsh reality would soon catch up to them. Perhaps some of the students already understood this, but they needed something to make them feel better at the moment. One must know that while this world was technically more advanced than Michael's previous one, it wasn't all sunshine for the average person. For example, bankers had long become a thing of the past, along with many other jobs. Only a few establishments still employed people for tasks that machines could do, either because they were too poor or wanted to be classy, like some upscale hotels. Most people in this world live in poverty, barely scraping by with the few jobs available to them. It was only after arriving in this world that Michael truly understood a saying from his old life: technology can be both a blessing and a curse. This desperation to escape their current circumstances was one of the reasons why these students so desperately wanted to become awakeners. If Michael hadn't awakened, he would have been on the receiving end of the teacher's encouragement too. He knew he was truly lucky. Seeing that his words had resonated with the students, the teacher nodded slightly in satisfaction before speaking again. The college exams for both regular colleges and cultivation academies are in 3 months, so make sure to prepare seriously during this time. Just because you don't need to come to school again after today doesn't mean you should slack off, okay? Yes, sir. The students, including Michael and the 2 other new awakeners, responded loudly. All right, you're dismissed. As the students made their way out of the hall, the teacher turned to Michael, Lillian, and Brian. With a smile, he said, "You 3, follow me to the principal's office." Chapter 4: Meeting the Principal. The moment the teacher in charge of the awakening ceremony left the hall with Michael and the 2 other new awakeners, they encountered 2 teachers, a male and a female, on their way to the principal's office. Following the male teacher was a young girl, who seemed to be around 17 or 18 years old. Behind the female teacher were 5 younger-looking students, 2 boys and 3 girls. From the brief conversation between the 3 teachers, Michael learned that the students accompanying them had successfully awakened as well. The girl following the male teacher was also from Class 3, though Michael didn't recognize her. That wasn't surprising. After all, Woodstone was a public school with over 600 students in Class 3 alone. There were 9 sections in Class 3, each with up to 100 students max per teacher. Although the classes rarely reached full capacity, since that would make even the large classrooms feel cramped, there were usually no fewer than 60 students per class. As for the 5 students behind the female teacher, they were from Class 1. Michael had guessed this due to their younger appearance, but he was still shocked by the number of awakeners in that class. In fact, he was surprised by how many students had successfully awakened this year in general. Including the students from Class 3, a total of 9 students had awakened. While this might seem small compared to Woodstone's overall student population, it was actually significant. Even Class 1, which consisted of 16-year-olds, the age group most likely to awaken, rarely had this many 4 awakeners in a single year. In all the years Michael had been in senior high, the total number of students who had successfully awakened, from his time in Class 1 through Class 3, including the older students, barely exceeded 12. And most of those awakeners had been from Class 1. This year, not a single student from Class 2, where most students were 17 years old, had awakened. Therefore, the number of awakeners at Woodstone Public High School this year was unusually high, and Class 3's success, in particular, was downright abnormal for reasons unknown. As Michael mused over his thoughts, they soon reached the principal's office. Upon reaching the door, the only female teacher among them took the initiative to knock. "Principal," she called out. "Come in," a voice responded from within the office. With permission granted, the female teacher took the lead and entered the room. Inside, a middle-aged man sat behind a desk. Michael recognized him. He was the principal of Woodstone Public High School No. 3, Mike Bill. It was rumored that he was a powerful knight, though Michael wasn't sure, as he had never seen the man in action. Setting aside the document he had been focused on, Principal Mike turned to smile at the newcomers. 9 awakeners this year. Heavens must really favor our school, the principal remarked, pleasantly surprised by the number of students in his office. It was customary for new awakeners to meet with the principal alongside their teachers, so he was confident he hadn't made a mistake. Seeing no one contradict his statement, he knew his assumption was correct. With this confirmation, the smile on Principal Mike's face grew even brighter. "I believe your teachers have already informed you why you're here, yes?" Principal Mike asked, glancing at Michael and the other students in his office. "Yes, sir," they replied in unison. "Haha, there's no need to be nervous. What I'm about to tell you is probably something you already know, but I'll still say it," the principal said with a light chuckle. Michael and the other students subconsciously straightened their backs. The principal paid no mind to this and continued. "As you know, as awakeners, your life and future are now different from those of ordinary people. Power and wealth are within your grasp, if you're wise enough to seize them. If you had failed to awaken, you would be preparing to enter an ordinary university to further your education. If you had decent talent in cultivation, you'd try to enter a cultivation academy. But you all have successfully awakened. So instead of attending a cultivation academy or an ordinary university, you'll be going to an awakened university, where you'll learn everything you need to know about being an awakener. You might think that going to an academy is unnecessary since you could just enter the land of origin on your own, like our ancestors, and make things work. While that's possible, anyone with good sense wouldn't do that. Why make things harder for yourself? So, right now, aside from entering the land of origin, which you'll soon have access to, getting into an Awakener Academy should be your next main focus. As for learning more about your new identity as an Awakener, you'll need to visit the Supers Association to register after this. The association will provide you with better information that you currently need." The principal then went on to mention a few other points. Some of these, Michael and the others already knew, while others provided new insights. After saying what he needed to, Principal Mike dismissed the students and teachers, asking Brian to stay behind. After being dismissed from the principal's office, the teacher responsible for overseeing Michael's awakening spoke up. "As new awakeners, you must register with the Supers Association within 3 days. Failing to do so is considered a crime. Though you have some time, I recommend you register immediately if you're free today. As the principal mentioned, you also need to take the upcoming college exams seriously. Just because you're awakeners doesn't exempt you from academic testing. While it may not be as strict as for regular university students due to your status, it's still important depending on the academy you plan to attend. Anyway, the Supers Association will have more details on this, so make sure you register quickly." For those who aren't in their 3rd year, the teacher addressed the students from Class 1, you can also attempt the college exams if you think you're up for it, as the Federation and most academies do not oppose it. However, most awakeners who manage to awaken before their 3rd year prefer to take home lessons while honing their skills as awakeners, aiming for a higher score when they're ready to enter the academy. After offering this advice, and with 2 other teachers sharing their own, they left the 9 students and returned to the teacher's office. There was no need to flatter the new awakeners. These were no longer the apocalyptic days. Although the teachers were softer with them compared to before, it wasn't to the point of bowing at their feet, but they certainly didn't want to offend them either. With the rise of cultivation, awakeners were no longer the only powerful people in the world. Ordinary individuals could reach similar levels of strength, though awakeners were a rarer breed. Veteran teachers like these knew that leaving a good impression was enough, as they had no hidden agendas. Chapter 5 Registering as an Awakener 1. The students felt a little lost after the teachers left, but not Michael. He already knew what he needed to do next. The most important task was to register at the Supers Association, and the second was to inform his aunt about his awakening. Michael was already familiar with the Supers Association. Even before he transmigrated into this world, the original owner of his body had a basic understanding of it. This was common knowledge among the natives. The Supers Association was an organization under the Federation, the new government established after the apocalypse. The world now had only one ruling authority, the Federation, under which were countries, states, and cities. The Supers Association managed all supernatural beings in the Aurora realm. Ordinary humans had to be a rank 1 cultivator before they could register, whereas awakeners were required to register immediately upon awakening, as they became supernatural beings the moment they awakened. The purpose of the Supers Association was to protect the general public, manage supernatural beings, and provide them with various benefits. Michael made his way out of the school compound. As soon as he stepped outside, he hailed an empty taxi that happened to be passing by. "To the Supers Association," he said. "That'll be $1, the driver replied. "Okay." The Supers Association was a little far from Woodstone Public School. On foot, it would take Michael about 35 minutes, but by taxi, it would take no more than 20. Settling into the passenger seat, Michael pulled his phone from his pocket. Normally, if the school were still in session, it would have been in his backpack, but with the college exams approaching and no real need to attend classes, everything aside from his school uniform was casual today. Every senior high student who came to school today did so primarily for the awakening ceremony. After today, the school would feel noticeably emptier. Though the technology in this world was more advanced than Earth's, familiar technologies still existed. The rich used floating cars, while the less well-off relied on vehicles with wheels. The wealthy had watches that projected holographic displays as substitutes for phones, while others were content with traditional phones. The world was a mix of old and new technology, but somehow it all blended into a strange yet harmonious system that didn't seem out of place. Michael decided to text his aunt instead of calling her. She worked as a cook at a relatively upscale restaurant, so she was likely still busy. Michael sent a short message saying he had succeeded in his awakening. Just as he was about to put his phone aside, an incoming call flashed on the screen. It was his aunt. Michael immediately answered the call. "Aunt, aren't you at work?" Michael immediately inquired. It was rare for his aunt to answer so quickly, even on her days off. "I'm still at work. I just happened to be on a short break when your message came in," his aunt, Aunt Mia, replied. Michael believed her, as he could hear the noise in the background. "Mike," his aunt called out, her tone hesitant as if she wanted to say something but was unsure. "Ma," Michael smiled, already guessing what was on her mind. He understood her disbelief. Most parents were shocked when their children awakened on their first try, let alone Michael, who had even less of a chance. "Your message," Aunt Mia began slowly, pausing before continuing, "is it true?" "It is, Aunt Mia. Today's my lucky day, haha," Michael chuckled in response. Aunt Mia let out a small squeak of joy, clearly trying to contain her excitement. Knowing she was still at work, Michael decided to end the conversation so she could get back to her duties. "I'm on my way to the Supers Association, Aunt. I'll talk to you when you get home." Okay. I'll transfer some money to you now. Get yourself something to eat and save a little for Lily when she gets back from school. I might be home a little late today." "Yes, Aunt." After exchanging a few more words, they ended the call. Michael let out a sigh as happiness surged through him. Though he was originally from Earth, he had fully embraced his role as Michael in this world and cared deeply for his family here. Perhaps it had something to do with losing his parents early in life back on Earth. In a way, both Michaels had experienced particularly difficult childhoods. After ending the call, Michael closed his eyes to rest, ignoring the driver's gaze, who seemed like he had something to ask. Only now did he realize how tense he had been in the awakening hall, leaving his spirit weary. It had only been a few minutes since Michael decided to rest when he felt a nudge from the driver. "We're here," the driver said. Michael weakly opened his eyes, still a bit dazed, but when he saw the two-story building not far from him, his mind cleared, and he quickly sat up. "Your code, please," Michael requested. "Here," the driver compiled, showing Michael a code on his phone, which Michael then scanned with his own phone, transferring the fare to the driver's account. "Thanks for the ride," Michael said. "No problem. Congratulations on your awakening, by the way." Watching the driver drive away and hearing his last words, a smile appeared on Michael's face. If the driver wasn't certain when he overheard the conversation with Michael's aunt earlier, he would be now, having seen how focused Michael was on the Supers Association branch as he got out of the car. Michael shook his head and refocused. Taking a deep breath, he made his way toward the entrance of the Supers Association.